Hi there, I'm Jessy Chahal. On today's edition of the Midday Update, all eyes on Muhyiddin. All Malaysian media, mainstream and social media are abuzz on the issue about the Prime Minister, his perhaps resignation, and what lies next for the country. Also, Dr. Owi's son, political analyst, will weigh in with some of his thoughts around this issue, and Associate Professor Dr. Ahmed Razman Abdul Latiff, economic analyst, also weighs in from an economic perspective. Ratnam will join us slightly later in international news to give us a snapshot of what's going on around the world. Now, before we get into the news proper, this is currently trending. As of this very minute, the Prime Minister has just left the special meeting that was held in Putrajaya. The Prime Minister, Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin, is expected to meet the Yang di-Pertuan Agong sometime later today at the Istana Negara. Now, his resignation is expected to follow shortly after. We don't have all the details on that just yet. We hope to give you some developments on the progress or the outcome of this meeting as and when we receive them. So please keep it locked on to Bernama TV as much as possible. Of course, we're also on social media, on Twitter, even on YouTube and our portal as well as Facebook. I'd like to bring in now Dr. Owi San, Senior Fellow from the Singapore Institute of International Affairs, to give us and share some of his viewpoints about what's currently happening here. Hi, Doctor. Thanks for being with us. It's good to speak to you once again. The Prime Minister, he clocked in for work this morning, but it's expected to be his final hours before his resignation. Of course, this came as an announcement in the past 24 hours or so. But all eyes are on him. What are your thoughts?
Well, indeed, as you said, all eyes are on Tan Sri Muhyiddin. So far, what we have are actually not, shall we say, confirmed news. We have various sayings that Tan Sri Muhyiddin perhaps would hand in his resignation letter to the king. But, well, that doesn't automatically, for example, mean that he is, well, resigned. The king, for example, just like during the Sheraton move, could ask him to stay on, just like the king did with Dr. Mahathir, but Dr. Mahathir declined, right? So, and if that were to happen, then Tan Sri Muhyiddin, is not resigned. He would stay on as prime minister, perhaps till, I don't know, the next general election, or at least till he is facing his motion of confidence in parliament. If indeed he does resign, namely he is no longer prime minister, then the whole process of the king ascertaining which member of parliament is likely to command a majority would once again commence. And we don't know how long the king would take, because we have a very meticulous king. He wants to do things very much within the constitutional bounds. That is very good. So we would just have to wait as to how long it would take for the king to determine such a leader to be the next prime minister if Tan Sri Muhyiddin were to resign.
Okay, so we know that the Prime Minister will be seeking an audience with the King later today. And of course, this, for what we know so far, is about his resignation, or to hand over his resignation letter. Doctor, at this point, give us a couple of scenarios. What is likely to happen?
Well, as I said, one is Tan Sri Muhyiddin may be asked to stay on until the, let's say, the motion of confidence. The other is, of course, the king appointing a new prime minister. What I can exclude is this thing about the next prime minister being the so-called interim one. There's no constitutional provision for that. You are either a prime minister or you are not. Tun Mahathir was asked to stay on actually as prime minister for an extra week until the king appoints somebody else. But, once the king appoints a new person to be the prime minister, that person would then, number one, this is very important, go to parliament and seek a motion of confidence. If that new prime minister passes this motion of confidence, then he could stay on. If not, the whole process would start again. The king would appoint somebody else. Then he would then, if the prime minister, the new prime minister, passes the confidence motion, he would then set up his cabinet and so on. But of course, now as the rumors are flying, there are various, shall we say, ambitious personalities all wanting to be prime minister, right?
Could you perhaps drop some names? Give us perhaps your list there, or some speculations that you think may or may not come through.
Well, I heard, for example, Datuk Sri Ismail Sabri has been conferring with many of his colleagues, both within UMNO as well as in Bersatu. He also visited former Prime Minister Dr. Mahathir last night and so on. So that he would certainly be a leading candidate. And then there are several other names within UMNO, such as, the perennial candidate Tengku Razali, Datuk Sri Hishamuddin Hussein. And from the other side of the political divide, of course, you have again another perennial prime ministerial candidate, namely Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim, as well as my fellow Sabahan, namely Datuk Sri Shafiq Abdul.
Okay, those are some short list of five names that it could swing either way at this point. We really don't know how things will unfold. What do you think, in your opinion, and what you're hearing from, whether it's through your eminent circle, what are the experts saying in terms of UMNO's point of view? The Deputy Prime Minister perhaps may be the best, most suitable candidate for the position at this point of time. What other things are you hearing from your circle?
Well, Datuk Sri Ismail Sabri himself certainly thinks so, right? They will be essentially keeping the ruling coalition intact, but sort of a reshuffle of leadership in the sense that UMNO would take over. And as Ismail Sabri is now the leader with the highest cabinet position, he would then become new prime minister. I think that is what he likes. But of course, let us not forget UMNO is actually led by another faction, right? Datuk Sri Zahid Hamidi and of course his friend, my former boss, Datuk Sri Najib Razak and so on. So all these figures, they may or may not like Datuk Sri Ismail Sabri to become the new prime minister. That's why things are very fluid. That's why Ismail Sabri, we have to reach out to Dr. Mahathir and so on. And on the other side of the political divide, of course, they would need to sort of consolidate their support, right? You are gunning either for Anwar or you are gunning for Shafiq Abdul. You cannot, support both at the same time because there's only one prime minister. Yeah.
Okay, at the ripe old age at 96, of course, we have the ex-Prime Minister Tun Mahathir. He has now proposed the formation of a bipartisan council that will help to govern the country until a new government can be formed. He's even offered himself to be the leader of that council. What we see is, in terms of history, a similar council was created for 2 years from after the May 1969 incident. Do you see this coming into play at this point?
Well, Dr. Mahathir has mooted this idea for a long time, for at least a few months, and volunteering himself also for a similar period, right? So, the number one, granted, it is not new, but unfortunately, it is also something extra constitutional. Now, if you have a sitting prime minister recommending to the king that such a council be formed, under the cabinet, actually, it cannot be replacing the cabinet, then it's workable. But absent that, for example, the king could not, at His Majesty's own initiative, or suddenly this council just sort of just emerged from nowhere. It has to be at the recommendation of a sitting prime minister. If the Tan Sri Muhyiddin resigned, then there's no sitting prime minister to recommend such a council. And therefore, that idea, I don't think is constitutionally possible. As much as I sort of like it, because Dr. Mahathir being in charge will perhaps have more resolute actions, right?
What other thoughts can you leave us with as we wait and see what unfolds in the next day?
I think we really need to appeal to the wisdom of His Majesty the King. Number one, of course, constitutionally, he has to appoint somebody who, in his opinion, would likely to command a majority. But that somebody, I think we should remind His Majesty, should also be somebody widely seen as capable of, number one, handling the pandemic, getting a firm grip on the pandemic, and number two, reviving the economy. If not, I think it is very likely whoever is appointed the new prime minister, even if he has a temporary parliamentary majority, very soon it will be another so-called Kerajaan Gagal in the making. That, I think, would be some very humble advice I would give to His Majesty.
Dr. Oisan, thank you so much for weighing in and joining us in this conversation. I'm sure we'll be speaking to you again during the course of the week as things unfold. Till then, stay safe and take care. Well, from all things political, let's look at what's happening with the economy. The Malaysian ringgit fell to a one-year low the beginning of the week. Of course, Monday, as we kickstart the weekend, stocks in Kuala Lumpur slipped as an expectation of that. Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin, of course, making that announcement to tender in his resignation, perhaps has turned investors a little cautious. Now, the ringgit traded at 4.24 per dollar, its lowest since July 2020, while the FTSE Bursa Malaysia index fell 0.6% in the first few minutes of trade as it opened. Now, to weigh in and share his views, joining us via Skype right now is Associate Professor Dr. Ahmed Razman Abdul Latiff from the Putra Business School. Doctor, it's good to speak to you again, and it's good to see you again, of course. Once again, all eyes are on the Prime Minister, Doctor, but either way, it is the Prime Minister's decision. What can this mean to our economy at this point?
Thank you, Jessy. Well, it means everything. As what you have mentioned, US dollar have gone depreciating against ringgit, and the last time it happened when we first suffered the beginning of the pandemic, COVID-19, and we introduced the MCO 1.0. And if you look at the KLCI index also today, it goes down by 7 to 8 points. And this thing happened when there's a political instability. The last time it dipped below 1,500 is when we have this Sabah election last year. So it's happening again, meaning that everything will not be well in the short term when we look into all these indicators, but in the long run also, it's going to be even more difficult for any upcoming government to address, especially when we have first the still high unemployment figures, more than 700,000. We have CPI, Consumer Price Index, hovering between 3 to 4%. But more seriously, recently, Ministry of Entrepreneur Development and Cooperative have highlighted the fact that if the economic sectors remain closed until October, they predict that close to half of the 1.15 million micro enterprises, SMEs, will collapse. So this is actually a very crucial we are addressing the health crisis, we are addressing the economic crisis. We actually don't want this political crisis, but this is actually not a good time to address the economic condition when we have this political instability.
Yes, so as to trail back to what you said as well, and as we know, the ringgit had fallen to a one-year low as the Prime Minister's resignation announcement came about. Can you further explain what this will mean to us, particularly if and when that really does happen?
Well, when ringgit fall, actually there's a pro and con, meaning our export will be cheaper, meaning that there will be increase in volume of exports. But in term of volume, but in terms of value, if it keep depreciating, then we will not be able to reap the benefit, and the import also will become more expensive to us, and this can hurt our export as well, because some of the sectors they importing components or raw material and then manufacture here and export to another country. So the import become too expensive, then it will affect our export eventually. So, but of course, when we look into what's happening now, I don't think this political stability will continue for many weeks, and the exchange rates actually can be very volatile indeed for the short term, but not necessarily in the long run. So it's a short-term reaction measures, but I think once we settle on this political situation, there will be some confidence more towards our ringgit.
Okay, so based on what's happening globally, economically, with the health crisis here in Malaysia as well, what do we know about the 12th Malaysia Plan in terms of it being tabled soon? How will it affect our goals, pre-budget at this point as well?
Yes, but based on what he announced earlier, we're supposed to have a pre-budget this month where we're going to discuss on all the demand or what the rakyat actually require for the government to come up with the initiative for the budget 2022. And so I don't know whether we're going to have that discussion anymore because of this. And next month also is very crucial where we are supposed to have a presentation of national RMK 12 in Parliament. So if Parliament cannot convene, then this will further derail the 5-year plan that we're supposed to have that fit into the wawasan kemakmuran bersama 2030, and also will also jeopardize the possibilities of having a more holistic, concrete, stable 2022 budget. And this is what concern majority of the industry players, the investors, whether local or foreign investors. They want to know what is our exit strategy to go out to come out from this pandemic, from the economic recession, and they also want to know whether we are going to do something that will benefit the people, the businesses, not just in the short run, but also in the next few years.
That's right. Up to date, Doctor, billions of ringgit has been spent. Also, the country or the economic we have taken a big hit or a big toll in terms of how much money has been put out, either to help the people, but also to sustain and stay afloat in this unprecedented put together and also has announced a few stimulus plans. Economically, though, what are your thoughts on all his initiatives right now? Pemulih, Perkasa, Prihatin, so on and so forth.
Yeah, so what we are probably asking now, where are we going to get the money? Of course, before this, what the government has done is to increase the statutory debt for federal debt to the GDP up to 60%, but that one can only be done in the parliamentary sitting. So in the meantime, what can be done if, especially when the situation merit another fiscal stimulus package by the end of this year, before we start to launch the next budget for 2022. So if you look at how government has been increasing, taking debt, we have seen that out of the total revenue that the government receives per year, 15% already going to be allocated to settle the annual debt obligation. And we know already for the development expenditure, it's 100% financed by that. The revenue that the government got is actually meant to be able to cover to operating expenditure only. So because of that, I feel that we cannot continue to have the same method or same strategy of piling up debt. It's probably like drug boost. You feel high, you feel good for a short while. It's not that I'm taking drug, but I assume. But in the long run, it's not going to be bad for our economic health. So what I'm trying to see here is that there must be something out of box, a result or solution, a reform to the monetary system, how we can kickstart the economy, increase the liquidity, make the transaction happening without resorting to that. And there are ways. So what you need to do is to engage all the professional, the economists, okay, that we will be able to give the kind of solution. Do not just restrict yourself to your own circle of advisors. Involve everybody to help
Right.
solve the economic situation right now.
Thank you very much, Associate Professor Dr. Ahmed Razman Abdul from Putra Business School. Thank you, Doc, for weighing in, and we hope to speak to you again. Indeed, a lot to unpack, a lot to unfold. We'll have to wait and see what happens in the next few days as well. Now, as we move on, according to the Senior Education Minister, Dato' Razzie Jidin, the federal government has postponed the resumption of physical lessons at schools nationwide. That's been pushed back to October 3rd. The ministry had previously proposed to reopen come 1st September, but the rising COVID-19 cases, of course, has led parents and educators, both sides expressing their concern over the potential risk of doing so. And the Prime Minister, Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin, says the government will allow 11 types of business activities in trade and distribution sectors to resume operations under Phase 1 of the National Recovery Plan. So this is new. These business categories are namely car wash services, electrical and electronics stores, household items and kitchenware stores, furniture stores, sports equipment stores, car accessories, sales centers, morning markets and farmers markets, clothing, fashion, accessory, jewelry, barbershops, and beauty centers, saloons, but only for basic services. So that comes as a bit of a relief as well, I'm sure, to business owners themselves and to consumers also. Now, Malaysia is on track to achieve the target of getting 50% of its adult population fully vaccinated by this month. Remember, that was the milestone. We are quickly achieving that. Now, the National Immunization Program has already started to show some positive results with the program administering 12 million doses of vaccine in July alone, more than 8 million cumulative doses administered from February to June. And in the meantime, according to Tourism, Arts and Culture Minister Datuk Sri Nancy Shukri, the ministry is planning to implement the tourism bubble approach in the country's major tourist destinations besides Langkawi. So there will be more places to travel. However, the Prime Minister today also did make a statement, and he said, look, you have to take responsibility, and this is a freedom that should not be abused. He says this because, of course, as people want to travel and resume to some normalcy, we still have to remember that COVID-19 is still aggressive and is still out there. At this point, I'd like to bring in Gerard Ratnam to give us a snapshot of what is happening around the world in international stories. Gerard?
Very interesting day indeed, especially here in Malaysia. We're still waiting for news, and I'll give you a bit of a glimpse as to what's happening throughout the day on the station or on the channel. But in the meantime, internationally, it's been Afghanistan, and more Afghanistan. Now, the UN has called on the Taliban to exercise restraint and this happened yesterday, particularly to protect the rights of women and girls after the militants entered Kabul and cemented their grip on the country. Now, the UN SecGen urges the Taliban and all other parties to exercise utmost restraint. I don't know what he means by that, in order to protect lives and ensure that humanitarian needs can be addressed. Now, the United Nations Security Council is set to hold a meeting later today with regards to Afghanistan. In the meantime, the spokesman for the Taliban's political office declared the war was over in Afghanistan and called for peaceful relations with the international community. Now, Taliban insurgents entered Kabul yesterday, and President Ashraf Ghani, he left Afghanistan saying he wanted to avoid bloodshed, bringing the militants close to taking over the country 2 decades after they were overthrown by a US-led invasion. So also, this is another thing in the news. There's some people who use militants, there's some people who won't, but let's just call them the Taliban. Now, Naeem says that no diplomatic body or headquarters was targeted in the Taliban's approach, and the group would provide safety for citizens and diplomatic missions. A lot of them want to leave the country at this point, and 60 countries want to pull their people out. Apparently, there are about 1,000 American troops there to facilitate this. We don't know what's going to happen. Of course, we're waiting for more news as to these diplomats or all these various embassies leaving the country. We don't know how many yet, but that seems to be the biggest news at this point. Now, a death toll from the Haiti quake hits 1,297. Devastating news was indeed. And the quake flattened thousands of homes and buildings, which is still clawing its way back from another major trembler 11 years ago and reeling in from assassinations of its president last month. So Haiti is going through a very tough time at this juncture. And before I let you go, just to give you a snapshot or a glimpse as to what's happening on the channel today, we have the bulletin Bernama at 1, and there's a panel there. At 2 o'clock, I'm going to be coming back. I'll be speaking to Nordin Abdullah, Azmin Hassan, and Peter Nicole. Hopefully, we'll be having a couple of other people join us for a 1-hour chat on the nation with regards to what's happening at the nation at this point. At 3 p.m., there's a grandstand. Then Bulletin Bernama comes back at 4 p.m. Another grandstand for you at 5 p.m. And Rang Bichara comes on at 9 p.m. Of course, we're talking about what's happening in the country. That's happening throughout the day right here on Bernama TV.
Jam-packed on the channel, Gerard. Thank you to you and the team, media frontliners who are, doing the hard work each and every day. Just to update you as well, there's been a hive of activity at the Istana Negara. Top government officials have been seen entering the premise or the palace, and the Prime Minister, of course, is also already on his way or almost there. So there you have it, Gerard. Thank you very much. Once again, I'd like to just tell you what's tweeting or what's trending on Twitter. Of course, Prime Minister, as he's fondly known as Abah. Malaysians have been sharing their thoughts and messages as well towards the current Prime Minister over news of him stepping down from his position, something that we are expecting to know more about later today. And of course, as Gerard brought in as well, there's been some updates from Afghanistan and in Thailand. Tweets regarding the current protest in Thailand for democracy has been flooding all over Twitter as well. I'm only going to leave you with these messages, this short and it's sweet. Get vaccinated. In fact, I got my second dose earlier this morning today. Wear a mask, double mask if you have to. But remember that we can all play our part to save lives. So stay home and stay safe. We've all been, adjusting to this new normal, as difficult as it is, a little bit more until we win this battle. Jessy Chahal signing out. Do take care and keep it locked on to Bernama TV. A lot happening today. See you next time. Bye-bye.